Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions, where we are critical, not cynical, of the music we listen to. I'm your host, Bryan, and since it is Monday, we are moving into a brand new theme. This one is interesting for two reasons. One, it's called Music Inspired by blank. And it's songs that are inspired by other works, other arts, whether it be books or films or maybe even other songs. But the other side is that this is our 100th unique theme, which is pretty wild. That's a long time. That's 100 weeks minimum of brand new, 100 weeks of brand new themes. But even just thinking of 100 weeks, I mean, golly, this is the third year of doing this. It's almost over. So, um, yeah, it's just wild. We're almost getting into year 4 of critical reactions already. Where has the time gone? For people who just want to get into this though, let's move forward. I know not everybody's big on intros, but I did want to share that pretty big milestone there. With that, we are going to be checking out Mastodon's Hearts Alive, which is based off of the novel Moby Dick. I did do a little bit of research on it because, I want to make these comparisons. The whole point of this week is seeing how the song captures the ideas present in what it was based off of. And this is the ending of the book. This is when Captain Ahab meets Moby Dick. It is the conclusion of the book. It's also the conclusion of the album. So, with all of that said, let's dive into Hearts Alive by Mastodon. Yeah, okay. A little bit of eeriness, lots of tension. We had the waves, the water, atmospheric stuff at the beginning of the track. Yes. Utilizing that one melodic idea and moving through several modes. Love that little drum fill there. A little bit of metric modulation. Having so many different ways of showcasing uncertainty in the music. Very sharp change, but we'll get into it. Shifted to 6. Lots of tension, lots of dissonance. Continuing on with the constant flow of eighth notes from our previous section. The varying intensity of our drum work. The intensity, the atmosphere here is so good. bit of a calm in the middle of the storm kind of thing. Yeah, so the snare is consistently flipping between emphasizing the downbeat and the offbeat. And it's like the heartbeat of the song is... We'll get onto it later. We'll get on it later. There's so much going on. Does Mastodon always work with chords like this? There are some pretty typical metal ideas in the chordal and harmonic components, but it's also playing with modes that metal just doesn't typically roll with, to achieve these very specific emotions. Now the snare is actually shifting from the front to the back, from beats 1 and 3 to 2 and 4. We're also seeing an increasing or increasing frequency of how often we're flipping back and forth. Yeah, moving from this atmospheric clean guitar to the heavier sections. We used to stay in these sections a lot longer, and now we are just flipping back and forth so quickly. That progression right there is one that I'm talking about that metal doesn't typically work well with, or work with frequently. Such precise drumming. Some more metric modulation. interesting emotions are going through here, but also just a very chaotic, polymetric ideas mixed with these metric modulations as well. Time is quickly becoming an unintelligible thing. I love just the toms here. I love the way this drummer feels time. Putting those snare strikes on the beat against the syncopated accents from the guitars sounds so good. Although it is disguised a little bit by those two 16th note bass kicks that come in just before. Interesting. The first thing I want to touch on is what is the first? There's so much I want to get to first. We're gonna start with emotion and atmosphere and chords and modes and the musical meat of this. There's a lot of riffage going on in this track. A lot of it actually is sitting around eighth note ideas. A lot of the riffs are just constant flow of eighth notes, which is just 2 notes per beat. And so we have these series of notes that, on the whole, are not really providing much in the realm of rhythm. They're not really providing much in the realm of even a strong melody. A lot of these ideas are rising and falling concepts. We're either rising in notes or in pitch, or we fall in pitch, or we have some combination of the two, where maybe we rise for half and fall for the second half. I wouldn't really say many of these opening licks, riffs, in the first 5 or so, 6 minutes maybe, are really going to be super memorable on the riffage itself. Because, like I stated, it's really just series of eighth notes. It's not even like at the end, which continues on with this pattern, but utilizes palm muted hits versus open strings, well, versus non-muted hits, to create a syncopated groove that has a bit more memorability to it as a melodic line, as a hook. But at the beginning, it's just a bunch of notes at the same intensity, the same style of performance. The only thing different is the pitches. But what those pitches do is give us it tells us what chord we're listening to. I've mentioned this before. Chords can be fully strummed, and you're just going to get that big resonant tone of all the notes coming together, and you'll immediately be able to feel that. But you can also play a chord by playing each note individually. The slower you do this, or the faster you do this, depending on who's listening, they may end up not being able to hear the larger idea at play, to combine all the sounds into something that informs them of the chord that sits underneath, or the chord that is implied, so to speak. But at this speed, it's, at least for me, a perfect medium point that I can immediately hear the chord that is implied. If they were all played together, it would not influence the emotional feeling of each bar in any way. And so we have a constant moving idea then that still provides us a chordal function without actually playing the chord. It's a really great way to go about doing this. They could have very easily just gone with strumming chords for, 70% of this track, and the emotional element would not have changed at all. But without that drive, without that push forward, without that constant momentum of just attack, 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 new notes all the time, I think a lot of the impact would be lost. So yeah, just a really smart decision to go with that. And the reason we need that momentum, especially in the beginning, before we hit our first metal section, where we're still in that clean guitar moment, is to provide tension. The song is moving towards somewhere, and we are curious where it's going. And we have momentum both in our chord progressions, when we explore a series of emotions back to back, and when we sort of just sit in that eerie moment, but we have the constant eighth notes to drive us forward. We're never stagnating, we're never sitting on a note. It's always pushing forward. There's this momentum and drive to the entire section. Not to mention the drums, which just provide so much energy in like one of the least energetic ways. Um, it's not thrash. We're not playing speed metal on the drums. They are a bit reserved, but because of the metric modulations that happen, which in this case we hear a lot of triplet feels against that the eighth note 4/4 going on. And that little 3 against 4 idea provides a bit of tension. Beautiful. But then the other bit of the time we have these little ornamental drum fills that are going on, plus the end of the phrase drum fills. Usually every 4 bars, the drummer's got something slick to throw in right before we lead back into the downbeat of the next bar. So There are just a lot of ways that we are getting multiple attacks, we're getting tension, we're getting momentum. The whole point of this intro, like 3 minutes, was it 2 minutes, something like that, is to it's to feel that tightness in your chest as you're about to begin something something large. Maybe it's your first time in front of a stage, right? It's your first time playing a concert to more than just your family or just like the five people who show up at the park or whatever. You're on a stage and people bought tickets. It's your first big one, and you're gonna feel that tightness, that tension, right? Or it could be unveiling of a scientific thing you've been working on. Maybe it's a study that you've had, and you have a peer reviewed paper, and it's being presented for the first time. That tension of accomplishing a big task, I think, is really what they're going for here, which, it makes sense. We have a dude who has spent the entire book wanting to find this whale, and we as the audience know that it's about to happen. And I think the captain does. It's been a long time since I read the book, but I think the captain knows that this is the moment as well. And just that tension, the tightness of the chest, that fight or flight kicking in, the adrenaline kicking in, all of that. That's what this opening, 2 or 3 minutes is talking about. And it's just such an effective method of doing it. And it really helps that we stay in it for so long. We'll get into the time factor later. I'm not completely sold that this needed to be almost 14 minutes. 13 and a half is a closer rounding, but I do really appreciate the length of this beginning. This is absolutely necessary because it's like waiting for a storm, or waiting for feedback on your concert or your project or whatever. You've got that tightness of what are they going to think, what are they going to say. That's what's happening here. What is happening next is out of your control. All you can do is wait. And that tension of wanting to speed things up, but time simultaneously feeling like it's slowing down, which is that, I mean, that kind of works well with the metric modulation, where the drive, the tempo is constant. Our eighth notes in our guitar is constant, but every once in a while our drums will shift to quarter note triplets, and it feels like it just drags out against that four. I don't know if they were specifically going for that or if the drummer just really likes doing that kind of modulation, but I really like that idea because it does feel like stretching time. And when you're waiting for something like this and you just have to wait and you don't know when it's going to happen, time does feel like it dilates. Um, yeah, just a phenomenal little detail there. Again, don't know if that's intentional, but it works so well within the thematic reading of the music. And then the last thing for this little topic here is just the emotional ride of the chords. We move through some very interesting ideas. And, like I had mentioned, some of these chords I don't hear too often in metal. I don't know exactly where I hear them. To me, I think the closest place, because I want to say classical, but then I think back to like um, older classical music, and yeah, I mean, it pops up. Classical music explores a lot of chords, but I don't really resonate with that idea. And then it hit me: modern orchestral music. It is classical technically, but specifically, I'm looking at soundtrack music. And that's when things clicked for me. A lot of this feels like soundtrack music. And this is going to tie in later when I talk about the length of the track. But right here, we're exploring various types of tensions in our chords and modes. Actually, it's not always, I mean, modes is tied more to keys than chords. uh Man, I'm gonna have to make a video about this. Things get a little confusing, especially if you're not used to music theory, notes and chords and keys and modes and what all this means and how they're related. But just the I'm just going to put it like this: when you put a specific selection of notes together, they achieve a very specific emotion. There are multiple ways of designating how to call or classifying these groups of notes. We can sometimes call them keys, we can call them modes. Um, I'm just going to try to move away from both of those. Well, actually, no, I'm going to take chords. Just going to move with chords. When I say chords, might also be keys, might also be modes, but chords is just a collection of notes. All right, that's simple. I think I've simplified this a little bit for people. All right, so we have chord progressions. For some of these sections, we just sort of bounce back and forth between two chords. We hear this a lot, especially towards the end of the track and in the middle of the track when we revisit some of these clean guitar sections. And we sit between these two things. And what they do, at least to my ears, we have a leading tone and a half resolution where it doesn't feel like it's ever fully resolved. We don't ever get that that exhale after the tension, right? When the tension disperses. We don't get a full amount of that, but it's enough to where we can have a bouncing back of tension and a little bit of release without ever feeling like we've hit the finality of the story. Um, and I really like that because it creates a lot of tension in my mind. And through that, it makes this song a bit exhausting. You are on the edge of your seat for 13 and a half minutes, or 13-ish minutes. The last 30, we kind of hit some ideas of resolution, and then we have that fade out at the end. But yeah, it's just this constant tension. It is, like I said, for me, it's a bit exhausting. I don't know what I physically looked like in the latter half of this song, but I do know that I spoke about it less frequently as it went on. And part of that was because we began to revisit more and more of the original ideas. I just didn't have anything to add on, but also I was just becoming tired of it. And not tired like I don't want to listen to it anymore, but physically tired. It's mentally exhausting to listen to, and a lot of that comes from the retained tension throughout the entire track. But against that, occasionally we'll also have these moving ideas. So instead of bouncing back and forth between the two, we'll move between four chords before returning back to this back and forth. And those four chords are interesting because they imply a few different emotions. Interestingly, one of them is a sort of victoriousness, a a feeling of power or superiority. It's snuck away there in the middle, and we kind of hit it and back off of it so quickly. We move on to the next idea, but it is there. It's almost as if it's the the overconfidence of the captain, feeling that he's already won this battle with this whale. But it's like I said, it's kind of there and back. It's almost like it's overshadowed by the rest of it, which include anxiety and eeriness, um, and even a little bit of fear. There's one extremely tense chord that we hit, again, for a moment, because we hit all four of these pretty quickly before backing off. And it's sort of like this flurry of emotions that I think is just, it just captures the emotional cocktail that I think anybody would be having at this moment. Um, fear and tension, anxiety, just waiting for the moment to happen, for this whale to appear, and the confidence of it all. And characters are, and people even, typically aren't one note. Most people aren't just angry or just happy or just sad or just scared. There's usually a group of emotions, and it's very complex. Portraying that musically is not always easy. And I've always given praise for bands who can create these very complicated emotional landscapes or soundscapes with their music. And sometimes it's through the use of complex chords. Instead of just using like a major chord for happiness, maybe there is a major chord with a little bit of a minor tinge to it. So it is happy and bright, but also a little melancholic. And you can continue to add notes to existing chords to make them more complex and to add different colors to them. It's almost like shading in a sense in physical art, where you can just use a red pencil and color something in, and then it's red, but you can also put a second layer of orange in there, or shade it with some black to give it some shadowing, or anything like that, where you start mixing your colors to craft very unique and specific vibes for what you're coloring. This is that same thing. You can really hone in on a specific combination of emotions as long as you know what you're doing, where the notes are coming from, how they work with and sometimes against the other notes in the chord. That's not what's happening here, though. These guys are crafting this emotional landscape through the use of a variety of chords. So instead of trying to create these very dense, complex chords, we go through a series of emotions quickly, which gives the same effect, and is, at least for me, a lot easier. A lot easier to do, to use these simple, specific chords quickly than to craft a very specific chord for very specific emotion. Um, and just because it's easier doesn't mean that it's worse or should be looked down upon. As always, I talk about everything being a tool in the composer's toolkit. Um, Sometimes it's better to work smarter than harder, and if this is what you got, it's better than slamming your head against the desk trying to figure out the specific chord that you need when you can just use these four chords back to back to achieve the same effect. So I 100% support doing this, especially since it provides that movement, which is what this whole beginning is all about. You want to keep that forward momentum, that direction going. So having a series of chords just works so much better for what the song is already doing. It just fits better with what's going on. So that is primarily the clean guitar section and even the distorted guitar section after that. A lot of it is these eighth note ideas that just keep the momentum, the eeriness, and the tension moving forward. The only difference is we shift from something that feels isolating to something that feels monstrous and large. And the way I read this heavier section is that we are no longer waiting. The whale has surfaced, and the fear and terror are palpable now. It is not a tension of waiting, but it is now seeing what you are supposed to be defeating. And, well, I guess even for a little bit, realizing you may have bit off more than you can chew. Um, it is just that raw, monstrous power. There's something very larger than life that comes out of the guitar and drum work there in the heavier metal section. And we bounce back and forth between these two for a while. I think we were probably at like minute 7 or 8 when we were still doing this dance here. Um, I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but I do realize that the frequency that we shift increases. The first time we're in that clean guitar section, we're there for like a minute, minute and a half. It felt like forever, which was also the intended purpose of it, like waiting for the whale to surface. Um, and then we were in the heavy guitar section with the vocals for quite a while. Then we flipped back, and it was a pretty long time again, but not as long. And then we went back to the metal, and then we were quickly back to the clean, and then back to the metal, and it became more frequent. And the way I see this is pauses between when the whale has surfaced and when it went back under. Moments of waiting again for your next opportunity to strike. Um, and how the intensity of the battle increased as time went on. There seemed to be less downtime um, as time passed. That's my reading of that. I don't know if that's accurate. Again, I got a really quick read on this ending of Moby Dick. It's been forever since I've read it, and I honestly don't remember anything that I read. Normally you read something, a quick synopsis, and it jogs your memory from something you might have experienced, years ago, maybe a book you read or an album that you listened to, and it's been like 15 years since the last time you listened to your favorite album. You pop it in, and you can't remember any of the lyrics, but then the album starts, and you got them all again, right? Yeah, that's what I was kind of hoping for, and it didn't happen. I have no memory of this this novel. Um, so yeah, that's my reading though, is the ebb and flow of the battle. Um, there's also something really interesting going on here. After this part, like minute 7, 8, 9, we enter into one of our first new sections. It is a moment of temporal dissonance where I think we're in 4/4, but the music is not. And the first time I tried to count it out, and I honestly thought the time signature was changing every bar. The beginning of the phrase, I could consistently find a 7/8 idea, but the 7/8 does not get replicated again. And then I decided to go quite a bit higher and listen to what the snares were doing. Well, the snare. There's only one in the kit, I'm going to assume. And it was a very slow accent. So I started following that, and I got this very slow 4/4, just like 1, 2, 3, 4. Um, and that's when I realized that the song was polymetric. It pushes against the 4/4 in such a way that after the first accent on beat 1 of the first bar, it doesn't accent beat 1 again until bar 5 at the end of the pattern because it's a 4-bar phrase. So what we have is emphasis then on the and of 3, and then an emphasis somewhere around 2 and 3 on the third bar, and the fourth bar I have no idea where the emphasis is at. But it is constantly shifting against this 4/4. It does not want to conform to accenting beats 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 or anything that would give any sort of consistency with this norm. It is its own beast. And to me, my reading of this was the water. We have a captain on a boat on the water, and I always hear about from people who are on boats that the water has a mind of its own, right? You don't get to control it, you just kind of got to go with the flow. And this almost feels like the water is working completely against Ahab and the rest of the people on the boat, almost as if it is working in favor of the whale, like it is a third party to this event. And I really like that reading. I have no idea if that's accurate. I don't know if that's what they intended for it. That is what I got out of it, though. It is just, but it's also just conflict in general, right? It is a set time signature and a rhythm that tries to fight that set time signature as hard as it can. It does eventually reconform every 4 bars, but it tries its best not to. And that conflict could be representative of even just Ahab and Moby Dick. So, I don't know, but I got a reading about it being the water primarily because a lot of this, that flipped back to 4/4, but a lot of this song ends up being in 6/8. And I have talked many times in the past about 6/8 just having this very general flow to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's very much an ebb and flow, wavy kind of thing, and I don't know how much of that has to do with the fact that I feel a lot of water-based thematic music, usually for soundtracks, are written in 3/4 and 6/8. They all have, well, not 3/4, 6/8 specifically. They all have this sort of waltzy kind of feeling to it. This flowiness. And I don't know where that started. I should probably look it up why or when possibly that connection was made, but there's so much water-based music out there based in 6/8. So when I hear that, I immediately think of waves and water. And it does pop up so often in here. There's a good portion of this song that's in 4/4, but the 6/8 I think is the dominant time signature. It's what I felt we were in the majority of the time. Um, so maybe that's what kind of led me to the water idea, and then it kind of being a secondary adversary to the captain. The last thing I want to talk about before hitting the lyrics, this is a lengthy video, 40 minutes in already, is going to be the final section. the extended guitar solo and the ideas that lead up into it, this is where things begin to get extremely chaotic, I think would be the word. But not in like your avant-garde mathcore kind of chaos. This is a very calculated chaos, and it's also working within a lot of musical constructs that are easily understood. We are in 4/4, I believe, at this moment. Even if we're not, we're in 6/8, which is also just a very general time signature. Um, the guitar tones are palatable. There's no vocals going on. Um, it's really just the lead guitar, I think the backing guitar and bass, and the drums, and nothing is really doing anything wild as far as rhythmic or multiple layers and the melody. It's not chaotic in the fact that there's a lot going on or that things are clashing, but it feels chaotic. It feels full of energy, like a whirlwind, even though musically it's not. It has that energy. And I think a lot of that comes from the guitar solo itself and the melodies that are played in this section. It is a brand new moment that introduces a brand new riff underneath, and this is that palm muted idea I was talking about earlier. It has a very strong pulse to it that pushes against the 4/4. This is further emphasized by, as I pointed out in the reaction, the snare hits emphasizing, I think it was 1 and 3. I could be wrong though. So yeah, this was in 4/4 actually, emphasizing beats 1 and 3, while our palm muted idea emphasizes the and of 2 and something else. I don't remember what it was, but it is an odd asymmetric idea that I think it was 1 and then the and of 2 and then 4 and then 1 and the and of 2. I think that was the idea right there. So its accented beats push against the time signature just a little bit in the middle of the bar, and the snare actually still accents it. So you get this, it almost feels like the song is trying to pull itself apart at that moment because the two elements are just a half beat out of step with each other. And it's really difficult, at least for me, to lean into one groove or the other. If the instruments were in sync with each other, either one of them would provide a movable or headbangable groove to, but because they're both present at the same time, it creates a little bit of this chaotic feeling. And that's only further expressed upon by the guitar solo, which leans into a lot of speed. There's a lot of moments of just playing constant eighth notes yet again and having these wild rising and falling arcs of notes that are paired against these longer held out notes. It once again provides an ebb and flow. It's movement and static, and then movement and static. That normally I would find a bit tiresome after a while because this is a very extended guitar solo. We're talking about a good minute and a half almost, I think, for the guitar solo itself. But because that we've already set up this idea, the movement versus stagnation concept, it feels very natural to have these ideas being present in a microcosm within our guitar solo. And I end up not really hearing the notes so much as far as the movement, the speed, and then the stagnation, more as a thematic component of the song. It's very well done. I think it's a great end to the track because things start to slow down by the end of the guitar solo, and it's not too long after that that the song ends and we have the fade out. It is, it's the battle winding down, and you're not going to take down the biggest whale in the ocean. It kind of was, I mean, the odds were stacked against them already. It could even be said that their fate was sealed the moment the book started. But I just really love the constant return to this theme of movement and direction and stagnation, and the contrast between the two and how they work together to craft specific elements as well, such as the tension at the beginning of the track. It is such an integral part of the song, whether they're working in tandem or against each other, that almost every part of the song can be tied to this idea. I did say we were going to do lyrics next, but there's at least one more thing I want to talk about, and that's the time. There's so many sections of this song that end up getting repeated, especially in the first, like I said, 6 to 7 minutes when we constantly go back and forth between our two modes. But now that I've talked about the use of that and the speeding up between the two sections, I'm not too sure that I would cut anything from there. And the last 5 minutes or so, I don't really feel we're dragged out. So maybe I've talked myself into enjoying the time. I still feel like the song was a bit longer than I wanted. Something in the middle. I don't remember any specifics. Something in the middle though. I remember thinking I wish we could just move on to the next part, but yeah, so I think I'm still going to have that opinion after this first listen. It's pushing the time just a little bit and there's probably some parts that can be cut back on, but overall, I think it's kind of earned its length. Um, there's something else I wanted to talk about too, and I don't remember what I gushed about the drum. I don't remember if I talked about the drums in the analysis. I gushed about them a lot in the reaction. I'm just gonna leave it at that. And the bass work was fine. I think this is one of those bands that just underutilizes their bass. There were plenty of moments when I felt like the bass could have done something. It played a lot of root tones, whole notes actually. While the guitar and drums were providing forward momentum, it provided this just lower looming sound. And actually, in the slower sections, that worked very well. It's supposed to be this tension. We have a note that sits below everything else that's tense. We have a calm note just sitting down here. Boat on the surface, beast under the water. Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, but in every other section we have driving energy, the bass just gets so underutilized. I can hear it come in and, play its note, and that's what it does a lot of. But given that it has that space to shine through despite its pitch, I think that those moments we should have had a little bit of movement in it. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just, put a couple of eighth notes before a dotted half note. So instead of holding out a note for 4 beats, you have do do do, and you still hold that note out for 3 beats, but you have a little bit of movement in the beat prior to it. Just like a little bit of something. But yeah, I'm actually coming around to the bass on the clean guitar sections. That works really well. Really great word painting there. Well, not even word painting, musical painting? Oh, yeah, there is one more thing. Jeez, 50 minutes in now. Again, this is going to be like musical painting. Like, I want to say it's word painting, but it's not based on the words. There are so many components of rising and falling lines all across this song. There are very few parts where we skip notes, where we go stepwise, where we do rising thirds or anything like that. A lot of the time, it is just the pitches are going straight up for several beats, or they're coming straight down for several beats. And as we get closer to the end of the track, we hear more and more descending lines. And the end of this story is that the ship's crew ends up drowning in the water. The ship is destroyed, and they descend into the depths of the ocean. So I think as the story goes on, we hear more of these descending lines. Makes perfect sense. Again, I don't know if that was intentional on their part. I'm gonna lean yes on this one. Mastodon seems to be a band that knows what they're doing as far as crafting theme into their music. Um, and this seems very intentional. It would be very easy to just continue on with some of the ideas you started with the song with and continue on these rising and falling peaks and valleys idea, but they didn't. They shifted more towards descending ideas. So That just seems intentional to me. All right, let's dive into some lyrics real quick. It's going to be an hour-long video. All right, verse 1. Taken down with hearts alive. Our hearts alive. The pre-chorus says, lurking dark underground, descend to bottom, swim below eternally into the deep blue sea. Okay, so I saw the word underground, and verse 1 said taken down, so I thought they were going to be tied together. They're not. They're two separate ideas. So going back to the verse 1, this almost seems to be like starting the story in media res, which, I mean, we kind of are, assuming that the album is chronological of the story. We are starting at the very end. That is the very definition of starting in the middle of the media. But it also feels like we've gone forward in time because our pre-chorus talks about the beast being below them, lurking in the darkness underground, right? This goes back to the idea of the ship being above water and the beast below. But our verse says we were taken down with our hearts alive. We were drowned in the water. Our hearts were full of life and we fell into the water. We were taken down there while our hearts were still alive, which is just, I mean, drowning is frightening. That is definitely one of my biggest fears of dying is being drowned. Like that's just seems so slow and frightening. And I think having that fear built right into the very first line, I think works well. But then we kind of bring it back a little bit, and like I said, we talk about Moby Dick hiding in the dark underground, which is the ocean, swimming below eternally in the deep blue sea. We hit our chorus though. Time and space all alone. It can be a lonely place. There it goes, opening up. I can't stand. I can't breathe. And I like the first half of this. It ties into the clean guitar section of just waiting. Time and space all alone. It can be a lonely place. Just, waiting for this beast to come up from the water. And just the loneliness of that, the anxiety, the tension, the feeling so small, just waiting and waiting and waiting. But then it appears. It goes and opens up. I can't stand. I can't breathe. That is the fear that we hear in that rising chord idea. And when he sees this beast, this whale, and the fear kicks in, I can't even stand. I can't even breathe. Like those are two primary things of living. And just to lose the strength in your legs and feel like you can't breathe anymore just really draws that impact that this visual has on our captain. Verse 2 says, rolled fin out, oil stripped, hold is filled. I don't know what any of that means. I mean, other than rolled the fin out, maybe like the whale rolled its body and its fin came out of the water kind of idea. But oil stripped, hold is filled. Yeah, I don't know. Our pre-chorus, though, says, ocean coil, water boils, we swim to the surface. Flame from mouth, smoke he breathes, enter the caverns of the deep. So maybe these lines in verse 2 I don't get had to do with, is metaphorical for the attack on the boat, right? The fin comes up, slaps the boat, it splinters into pieces. I don't know how that works as a metaphor for what they said, but I think that's what was supposed to be informed by those lines. And I love this right here. There's so much contrasting imagery. We are in the middle of the ocean with a whale, and everything here is about fire. The water boils, and from the mouth of the whale comes flame and smoke as he breathes. I think this is just really awesome because the water boiling would just be bubbles. If you've ever been in, a lake or a pond or a pool or whatever, and you splash down and the bubbles start to rise up, it does look like boiling water. But to bring that up specifically against the imagery of this whale being compared to a dragon, a flame-breathing dragon, really ties it all together thematically by showcasing everything through the lens of heat and flame, which we tend to associate more with danger than water. There are people who have a fear of water, but most people have a fear of fire. It's more relatable, but it's also very striking because it is the opposite. Like the direct water and fire, you don't get much more opposite than that. It's just a beautiful little section there. I wonder, 'cause, we checked out Mastodon's Emperor of Sand a few months ago, weeks ago. I don't know. Album reviews, they all just kind of blend together. Um, I remember a lot of very strong metaphorical writing in there, but I don't remember anything visually compelling like this. And I wonder if this was inspired by or even completely ripped from the novel. Just because it is such a it stands out against everything we've read so far. This pre-chorus is just gorgeous. The chorus is the same thing. Verse 3 says, terrified, ghastly cry, spiraled lives taken down. Yeah, and that right there is the drowning aspect. Spiraled lives could mean a lot because it kind of alludes to the visuals of a whirlpool, spiraling down, dragging things to the bottom of the ocean. But I mean, it could also just be like I'd mentioned, they were kind of doomed from the start, just even wanting to take on this quest of fighting this giant whale. That you could say that from the very first word of the story, they've been spiraling downward. Every step towards this moment has brought them one step closer to their death. Their lives have been spiraling from the start. And then the bridge just says, the iron side bucket of lead, battle is she not for defeat. I don't understand the first two unless they're just comparing him. Interesting. The pre-chorus too, and it's Moby is a traditional boy's name, and it even says smoke he breathes. But down here it says battle is she not for defeat. Anyways, I think the iron side bucket of lead thing is like comparing the whale to a monstrous machine. But then it just states, straight up, this wasn't really a battle, not for the whale. Um, there was just no way that the whale was going to be defeated here. There is just destined that Ahab and the rest of the crew were going to be drowned. They were going to be killed here. So yeah, that little acknowledgement there, like, yeah, we screwed up. We shouldn't have even taken this on. There's no chance. So yeah, I think there's a lot of follow through and connective ties between the lyrics and the music. And I pointed out a few of those there. Interesting stuff. Mastodon they're a band that I want to dig more into, but not consistently grab me. It's a band that has really standout titles, and then stuff that exists. At least for me, I'm not saying that this is a conclusive reading of Mastodon's works and that if you like them, then you like mediocre music. No, I'm not saying that at all. If you like it, go for it. They're just not for me, except for when they are. And it makes it really difficult to do discography dives, but a track like this makes me want to dig into their music. I'm a little worried, though, that if I dig into Leviathan, I'm kind of going to be disappointed, except for maybe this track, or, maybe two of the tracks on the album. What do we got, 9 tracks? Wait a second, I have been led oh no, okay. So there is an instrumental that comes after this. I had mentioned this was the album closer. I have been led astray on that information. But everything after this looks like live tracks. I gotta look real quick before I wrap this up. I'm already here, and you're already here for an hour. If you're still watching, I don't think you're gonna mind another 40 seconds. Leviathan. Disambiguous. Music, album, Mastodon. Okay, so Joseph Merrick, the 3-minute instrumental that comes after this, is part of it. Everything else I saw on that list was bonus stuff for for bonus tracks, box sets, and stuff like that. Wow, okay. This is only a 45-minute album, with this 13-minute track taking up a quarter of that. A third, just over a third of it. Everything else is less than 5 minutes long. Most of them sitting in the 2 and 3 minute range. Wow. All right, those are my thoughts on Mastodon's. What was this track? Hearts Alive. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not. Anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, please let me know. Above the comment section is a description box, and then there's a link for Linktree, which will take you to this menu right here. Has links for everything related to the channel, such as various ways to support the channel and various ways to connect with communities around the channel, such as Twitter and Discord. Above that, you can find the buttons to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We have a special selection out today as well. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll continue on with music inspired by week, as well as another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.